For our next institutional co-founder spotlight, we're joined by Robert D. Young, and he's director of the Gerontology Research Group's Supercentenarian Research and Database Division. Welcome, Robert.
Greetings. First thing I would like to say is that the Gerontology Research Group has been, working with this group with Dmitry Kamitsky for over a decade. In fact, I think Dmitry met Dr. L. Stephen Coles, the founder of the Gerontology Research Group, way back around 2008. So this has been a long-term view and a long-term process. And one of the things that we're trying to do is that in order to test whether the maximum human lifespan is being extended with treatments, we have to first figure out, number one, how long people are living, and then figuring out, if some people are living longer, why are those people living longer? And the Gerontology Research Group began tracking supercentenarian data in 1997. So this project has been going for over 23 years. A lot of this was inspired by Jeanne Calment, the French woman that lived to be 122 and the very first validated person to reach the age of 120. And one of the things that I want to say here is, I'm also with Guinness World Records. I'm a senior consultant for gerontology for Guinness World Records, and it's that when it comes to the maximum human lifespan, there has been a lot of people that are either overly optimistic or overly skeptical. And I think we need to take an approach that is a science-based approach and a reason-based approach. And I think that the momentum is starting to turn in that direction. The first step was to defeat the myths of aging. And I think between the 1970s and the early 2000s, the myths of aging have been mostly stamped out. The second thing, though, is now we have to take on the over-skeptics. We've had some people out there, claiming that, people over 110 don't exist. And this is complete nonsense. And we need to get rid of that idea. And we need to look at the facts. And the facts are showing very strongly. I think there was a recent paper that just came out that showed that if you remove all the causes of death other than aging, the maximum human lifespan would be approximately 135 plus or minus 15. Now, this is just one paper, but it was a very interesting estimate, and it tailors fairly well with what we see with the Gerontology Research Group data, with the understanding that when you add back in factors such as heart disease, cancer, accidents, every other cause of death, that you're necessarily going to have a lower maximum lifespan. So when we have a maximum observed lifespan of 122, but extreme value theorists, another area that's been really developing well in the past 5 to 10 years is, instead of relying simply on 1 or 2 data points, is come up with extreme value theory, and they can basically use machine calculations, use supercomputers to calculate if you had 1 billion persons and you had a life expectancy of X, what is the expected results? And a lot of these results are showing that the maximum expected lifespan is approximately 125 plus or minus 3, which is interesting because without the other causes of death, the maximum lifespan was 135. With the environmental negative effects, that it was 125. So this data comes in fairly well. So a third area that I think is really developing well is finding out, are supercentenarians qualitatively different? And the answer is yes. And this is actually an area that has been not properly studied and not properly developed. But we just had a paper that came out in Italy that showed for the first time, I think, that the supercentenarians and actually centenarians also were having biomarkers of aging and longevity that were significantly different than the average population. This actually suggests that the average population dies out before they reach these maximum ages. Only the people with a certain specific set of longevity genes are able to attain to maximum ages. And actually, this is basically called the winning the lottery hypothesis. In order to achieve maximum lifespan, you have to have every gene to be correct. If you have some genes that are not correct, then you're not going to be able to reach this thing. So this is an area of research that really needs to be developed further and needs a lot of funding, because now we're starting to identify, the genetic factors that only people, let me just say this. Right now, approximately 1 in 4 million people are 110 plus. Okay, so we have to understand that it really is winning the lottery to be a super longevous person. And since these people have special genetics that almost no one else has, to me, this is kind of a way to shorten the process of natural selection. Instead of going through 300,000 years of evolution, we can simply cut the corner and go straight to identify the people that are living super longevous right now, and figure out that, well, we can apply this super longevity genetics to the normal population, and with either genetic therapy or some type of treatments. I think that's a big issue. Another area that really needs a lot more development is causes of death for people 110 plus. I think there's actually 3 or 4 big areas that have not been properly studied but need to. One is Dr. Coles did research. He did actually the first autopsy study of supercentenarians, and he found about 60% of supercentenarians were dying from the buildup of amyloid plaques and tangles, and associated with Alzheimer's disease in the past. But now we're finding that amyloid plaques and tangles could build up in the heart, the lungs, the liver, other body parts. It wasn't just a brain issue. And it affects about half the population, and half the population is not affected, and we're not sure why. And this is a question that has not been followed up on sufficiently. It has not been answered. Why is approximately half the population having trouble with amyloid protein buildup that is shortening their lifespan? Another area for stem cell exhaustion reserve, we had this woman in the Netherlands that was 115. When she died, by the way, her brain had no sign of Alzheimer's, no sign of amyloid, so she was part of the half of the population that didn't have problems with amyloid buildup. But she had a problem. It's called stem cell exhaustion. They found that only 2 active blood stem cell lines were still working, and all the others had stopped. And a normal human has 10,000 to 20,000 stem cell lines. Now, one problem is this is only one individual, and she also had cancer. So this leaves a lot of questions unanswered. Were her stem cell lines exhausted because she had cancer? Or was it because she reached some type of biological factor? One of the things that I wanted to do with our longevity overview report in 2020, and I was asking if we could go check that later, but it's already online, so we can share that later, is this idea of across the globe, the maximum human lifespan seems to be the same everywhere. And this really suggests that the longevity factors are mostly biological. Environmental has a minor effect. Things such as climate can have a small effect. People tend to live longer in tropical locations, areas that don't get cold. We know the human body has trouble with cold, and especially over 80. And we also see that a lot of the diseases tend to be more common in areas that have the winter cycle, whereas we see many of the most longevous people, for example, in Europe, everybody that lived to be 116 plus, everybody lived in the Mediterranean region. No one lived in the northern part of Europe. So what does that tell you? There's a little bit of a climate benefit, but that's only a small benefit. To me, the greater benefit we have to look at is the biological components of aging. Another area that I think that really needs to be understood is there's this misconception among some people that there's been a maximum lifespan increase that's been huge. And in fact, what they're actually confusing is the idea of life expectancy increase. If we go back to the data, for example, in 1898, the maximum observed human lifespan was 110. And in 1997, it was 122. So if you map that out, that was a gain of approximately 12 years over a 99-year period. That's about 1 year per decade. That is not a huge increase. And in fact, we're seeing a little bit of a problem with the data, where at age 113 and a half, the mortality rate begins to enter what I call the death zone. And the death zone is the point where the maximum, where the mortality rate goes above 50%, where the chance of death is greater than half. We see that at age 110, the death rate's about 50%, 111 is about 50%, 112 is about 50%. About 113 and a half, it starts to go up. This is the start of cohort extinction. And actually, I had this hypothesis in 2012 I put out called the mortality peak hypothesis. A lot of people didn't like this idea. In fact, there's probably part of an issue here. We have some people are pushing this exponential mortality, high mortality model, and some people are pushing mortality deceleration. And in fact, both the GRG and the ideal data is showing that both of the ideas are not correct. That in fact, the data is trending between the two extremes. It's not high mortality and it's not the low mortality. It's actually mid-range mortality. And the data is also bunching up very, very, very tightly in ways that would be not random chance. Okay, so some of the cohort areas are showing mortality rate, death rates in excess of 80% annual risk of death. So something's going on there that's not even happening at 110. Something's going on between 113 and a half and 117, where the human body begins to give out and something's going on there. And we don't have enough data to study what the problem is. We've identified a problem, but we haven't figured out what the problem is. And we've known about this problem for 15, 20 years. And I think it's time for us to, have some more research and more funding into this area. So one of the things that the Gerontology Research Group wants to do, especially the Supercentenarian Aging Division, is teaming up with Longevity International, Longevity Technology, and all these other associated groups, is we want to get the message out there of areas that we've identified through our studies of supercentenarians for follow-up studies. And I definitely think that it's not just one track, there's several different tracks here that we need to do. And I think if we have other people in other areas that have a better understanding of this data, the data, if we went back 25 years, we didn't have these answers. Now we have these answers. We know, for example, go back to 1995, scientists believed that over 105 that males live longer. That turned out to be false. In fact, we see that females live longer. And when we go to the data at age 110, it's 90% female. At 115, it's more like 95% female. And so we have this biological advantage. We found that females have a 3% lower risk of death at every age from conception to cohort extinction. That means even in the womb, male fetuses have a higher mortality rate in the womb than female fetuses. So there's actually something about it's easier for females to live longer. And this is actually an idea that I've helped develop. It's called the double X hypothesis. This actually started with studies of birds, but I've kind of tried to say, when I heard about them studying birds and coming up with this idea, I said, what, this fits very well with humans, because before that, they were trying to come up with this idea like the menopause hypothesis and things like this. But the data didn't really show that, because the female advantage was the same before menopause and after menopause. So that idea is out. So one idea that is in is that every female has a backup copy of their X chromosome. And if there's a mistake on the first copy, the second copy can activate to cover that mistake. That means for every, genetic issue that the female has 2 chances to get it right, the male has only 1 chance. So when you put it that way, it's already a big reason why females live longer at virtually every age. The only age where males seem to do a little bit better is age 13, and that's when the female body really starts to go through puberty. Other than that, it really, the data is showing, we had actually Don Jennery from Jet Propulsion Laboratory and some other people, did some research about a decade ago, and it really showed very strongly that at every age level, whether it's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 110, the females continue to live longer. In addition, we also know that the male body tends to have more muscle mass and tends to be more built for peak strength. We know that males can, jump faster, run faster, lift more weights, all this stuff. But there's a price to be paid, and the price to be paid is less longevity. The female body is built more for endurance. There's this idea that especially that because the female body having to go through childbirth, and a lot of females in the past before modern technology, if they were not able to endure childbirth, they died in childbirth. This factor is considered to be a hypothesis, for why females might be able to have more endurance. But I think this is one question, though, is there a way to help males live longer and to try to close the gap, or should we just acknowledge the fact that there's a gap there and that's just the way it is? I think that's an issue that needs to be discussed. One area we do understand is environmentalism. Males in the past tended to have more high-risk jobs, ride motorcycles, smoke more cigarettes, and things like that. I think those type of areas are areas where we can say that, yes, you can do better on that. But I think when it comes to the biological component, I'm not so sure. I think there's an area, though, we need to talk about. So another thing I wanted to mention is that I'm currently working on some projects, including I'm writing an encyclopedia articles for the entire world. and it's scheduled to come out probably by the end of this year. And this is going to be very exciting. We have some data that's never before been shared. And I think once this comes out, it's at the moment, it's scheduled for November 2021. If it comes out, then I think I can help update longevity overview, maybe January 2022 with some of the updated data, because the data continues to grow in size. We now have the Gerontology Research Group. We have over 3,200 cases for 110 plus. And, you know, before people said, well, where's the statistical power? Well, we're continuing to grow the statistical power, and the data is going more and more strongly in the direction that we already envisioned that was going. So the ideas that we already had, then people questioned, you know, maybe the data was, you know, small sample size. Well, guess what? The data is continuing to grow in power, and we're getting a better sense that, yes, this is actually the issue. So I think there's so much to talk about. I'm not sure I can fit everything in 15 minutes, but I think that questions, follow up, a good chance for other people to, you know, ask questions for particular areas that they're interested in.
Thanks so much for that, as always, Robert. Very, very insightful. For questions, I think we'll table those for the panel discussion, provided we have time for that today. But thank you once again. I look forward to that encyclopedia article. And yes,
actually more than one.
Yes, and we'd be delighted to update the Supercentenarians Landscape Report, our Gerontology Research Group collaboration in the new year, for sure.